topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, good morning, America. Bill Martinez here. Good to have you with us. For more information on the show, you want to check it out, BillMartinezLive.com. Mark Shaw, he is, in my humble opinion, the JFK assassination expert. He has written so many books, best-selling author and attorney. And, when all the release of the JFK documents was being sent out, although not all of it, we're not 100%, but we had 60,000. I think some have said as many as 80,000 new pages to look at. I said, well, I got to get a hold of Mark, get him on the air here for us so that he can break it down and help us understand. Mark, welcome to the show. As always, good to have you with us.
Hey, thanks so much, Bill. I appreciate it. Good to talk to you.
Well, let's take a look. Anything earth-shattering for you out of these documents that were just released?
Well, it's interesting to me that, yes, there's some disappointments and there's some positives there, I believe. I just want to quickly, if we can, a little bit of history here. I'm a historian, as you know, and everything.
Right.
Let's think about the investigation so far.
Okay.
63, of course, and 64 was the Warren Commission. And we now know, and I've proven in my books, The Reporting Too Much and Collateral Damage, the others, and now a new book, Injustice for All, Injustice for the First Degree, a new book coming out. Everybody knows now, and I think it's been proven that there was corruption at the Warren Commission.
Right.
I was able to interview an insider who was a legislative assistant for one of the members, Senator John Sherman Cooper. And he gave me all of this information about the corruption that was going on. The staff members did most of the interviews. They knew about Ruby's contacts with organized crime. They ignored it. So I think most people are very dubious of that investigation. Next up was the House Subcommittee on Assassinations. And basically, that was headed by Robert Blakey and others. And I think they really tried to do a good job. It's much more extensive into JFK's death. But they decided that, yes, there was more than one shooter. They looked in the direction of Carlos Marcello. Could they prove it? No, but they tried to do that. So that was the first time that there was a break by a committee. The next one was the Church Committee, Frank Church. Remember the senator, I think from Idaho or Montana or something. They looked into this, and I had to go back and see what they found. But most of it had to do with CIA involvement and trying to figure out what the CIA was doing and all that. They were very upset with the way the Justice Department, the Warren Commission, all of that, it was handled. So now we come to this situation. And we've been waiting and waiting for all these documents. So many of them had already been released. And in fact, the last batch for me was more interesting than the ones that came out. What am I disappointed about? Number one, are these all the documents? And we know they're not, because there was an article done by a pretty good expert about the assassination saying there's 2,400 FBI reports about the assassination out there that were never given to the National Archives.
Exactly.
Well, those weren't released this week. And one of those reports was really interesting to me because it talks about that in those reports, the FBI looked into Carlos Marcello's time in prison. And I've been able in my books to show that there's an account in, I think it's 1968 or whatever, that Marcello actually confessed basically to the assassination of JFK, saying, I don't want to use too bad a language, but he said, I'm glad I killed the son of a bitch, and so on and so forth that way. Right. So that wasn't in there.
Well, Mark, didn't Bobby Kennedy, when he first was presented and told of his brother's assassination, didn't he say Marcello had to be the guy?
I'll tell you what, you're so smart. I have the pages from my books right here.
Okay.
And basically, the call came from J. Edgar Hoover to Bobby Kennedy. Your brother's been shot. And of course, that just gives me shivers when I hear that. And I'm sure it did Bobby Kennedy. Hoover calls back then again, and he doesn't seem to be the sorriest guy in the world and says, your brother is dead.
Right.
So Bobby Kennedy turns to some of his associates there, ones who worked with him in the Attorney General's office, and he said, first of all, I knew something would happen, but I thought it would be me. He told several very credible people around there. I believe it was the guy from New Orleans, Marcello, and so on and so forth. Now, Robert Kennedy Jr. has tried to rewrite history about that because he said that his father told him it was CIA. It never happened.
Right.
But anyway, that probably is the best place to go to find out exactly what happened to JFK. But anyway, now we're in a situation where we're looking at all these documents. I was disappointed because the FBI reports were not in there. Basically, those reports in these records show they're really all about the CIA dirty tricks in the 1960s. And they pulled some of them, tapping phones, doing different things like that.
Which is the same thing they were doing all around the globe, right, Mark? I mean, this wasn't
absolutely
just exclusive
they certainly
in
were.
the United States, right? Exactly.
So that's
this is
in
a
there.
well-established pattern.
Yeah, there is some information about the CIA suspecting Oswald, but it's frankly the records show that the investigation was like a wild goose chase. They were all over the place. I found one document where they sent about a dozen FBI agents to Helsinki because Oswald had been there, and they had to figure out at one point how long it took him to drive from his hotel to the airport. So there was a lot of wasted effort, unfortunately, with regard to all that. The other disappointments that were major to me in the documents that both before and the ones that just came out, not one mention of Dorothy Kilgallen, as we can talk about.
Right.
And there's very, very few mentions, if any, of Carlos Marcello, other than the kinds of things that I was just talking about. So that was disappointing to me. I think the question, Bill, we have to ask ourselves, did we really get all the documents? I know the president has said this is, and I think his intention was good. And now this task force that has been organized to investigate the JFK and RFK assassinations, I think their intentions are good. But what concerns me is that they're looking to make the same mistakes the Warren Commission did. What did they do first? They went to Dallas. They interviewed some people who are still alive that worked on the assassination. They went to that dastardly sixth-floor museum, which is basically a shrine to Oswald.
Right.
Now they're kind of heading down that road with regard to the CIA investigations and everything else like that. And I'm afraid they're going to make the same mistakes that the Warren Commission made in terms of where they're going with this. Now, I was encouraged. I've really been concerned about this task force, so I decided to let them know how I feel about what they're doing. And I sent a letter to the chairwoman, Anna Paulina Luna, a Republican from Florida.
The Congresswoman, yes, and out of Florida. You're right.
And I said, recently I read of your being appointed as the I also noted in the press release you mentioned that based on your initial evaluation of certain evidence provided, you believe there were two shooters who assassinated JFK, a sure step in the direction of proving there was a plot to kill him. Yes. So somewhere or another around there, she parted herself from the Oswald alone theory, which I was very happy to say. So I wrote her and I said, since I'm unaware if you and your colleagues know of my research, I would like to contribute to your investigation, assist where possible with exposing the strongest evidence available so as to provide the public with the more logical conclusions available at that time. And then what I added to that was, what about Dorothy Kilgallen? Right. You have all this speculations in the documents, and all these so-called experts out there are speculating about what happened. They weren't in Dallas in 1963. Neither was I, and neither were you.
Right.
But Dorothy Kilgallen was. And as you know, she was the real thing.
Right, exactly.
A Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist. Her column in the New York Journal of America, 200,000 people read it every day. The star of What's My Line. She handled the Dr. Sem Shepard and Charles Lindbergh cases, and she was the real deal. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know, she was a very close friend of JFK's. He had been to her home for parties. They knew each other very well. And so when he died, Well, the other thing that he did, he invited Dorothy and her young son, Kerry, to the White House. And while there, JFK made a real fuss over the little boy bringing these letters from his third grade class. So when JFK died, Dorothy wrote a column that said, what I remember is a tall man stooping over a little boy, praising him about the letters that my son had brought from the third grade class. This is the man who was assassinated in JFK, assassinated in Dallas. And immediately she went to Dallas and she was there. And how do we know that? Well, she interviewed Jess Curry, first of all, and he told her that when he heard the shots, he immediately sent his officers to the overpass, not the book depository. And how do we know that's true? Because he wrote a book about it. And people can find that book. It's a rare book, but find it. Second, she was at the Ruby trial. All right, front row. And we have
she was there every day.
Every day, photographs, front row, everything. There's one photograph of her being frisked. I mean, she was there. So she listens to all this testimony, and immediately she is dubious of Jack Ruby. We should say right now, she never focused in on the CIA. She never focused in on Oswald. She focused on Jack Ruby because at that trial, she heard testimony that somebody had overheard him saying, I will be there when Oswald is transferred. And it's a very credible account. And she thought to herself, what? Ruby's saying, I just happened by there. Well, that wasn't true. And that really launched her into the investigation.
Well, and that's like anything when you're investigating, you're looking for those loose threads, right? And this was a blatant loose thread. It
really was. And again, I'm just impressed with your smarts about all this, because some people have missed all this. So what Dorothy started doing was just writing all her columns. The first one was the Oswald file must not close, where she basically said, they've killed my president and no file is going to be closed in Dallas about that. I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. And then, of course, at the trial, she heard all this testimony. It was kind of conflicting and everything. But then she was, of 400 reporters there, the only one to have interviewed Jack Ruby, and she did it 3 times. The judge set it up. Ruby's co-counsel permitted it. And she wrote a column called Ruby Stars at Last, which indicates all of her gifted abilities as a wordsmith, but it really describes, you feel like you're right in the courtroom with her, and you're seeing Ruby and all that. Now, she interviewed him 3 times. One of the problems we have is we don't know what he told her, because when Dorothy dies a few months later, well, almost a year later, her JFK assassination records are stolen. And the manuscript for a book she's writing for Random House about the assassination is stolen as well. What we do know is that the first thing she did after she talked to Ruby was go to New Orleans, because she had really believed, I'm a former criminal defense lawyer. I think you said that. I always look at motive, and I think you probably do too. That's a homicide detective's best friend. Well, if you look at motive for killing JFK, it's crystal clear. Because what happened when the Kennedys took over the White House? Well, they had only won the election. They only won the election, because they knew they were going to lose Illinois and West Virginia. So they brought in, some mafioso to help them stuff the ballot boxes, especially in Chicago, where people voted 17,000
which is amazing, Mark, because here recently we found out that was in fact the fact. That they had stuffed them, and it's like the Democrats. It's interesting how they, want to protect the, the validity of the ballot box. But here, time and again, they've been stuffing the ballot box, and I'm going, what are we doing? 60 years later, we're finding this out as a matter of fact. I mean, this is insane, right?
I'm from a little town in Indiana called Auburn, where they made the automobile, about 6,000 people. Yes. There were even allegations at that time about stuffing the ballot box in that little city. So we can't really trust a lot of that. But that's what happened. So what's the deal? Well, you help us win the election, mafioso. We'll leave you alone when we get in the White House. But the first thing that happened, there's a reliable account from a guy named John Sigenthaler, who was later the founder of USA Today. I interviewed him. He was right there at a breakfast with JFK and RFK when JFK basically forced Robert Kennedy to become Attorney General. You have to remember, he had never stepped foot in a courtroom.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
what's the first thing that Robert Kennedy does? Well, he goes after those guys. And the one he went after the most was Carlos Marcello,
Right.
because he hated those mafioso. He sent him to deported him to Central America. Marcello finally gets back in the United States. And Nick Pileggi, you may know that name, the great author who wrote Casino and other books, once told me, Mark, the middle name for those Sicilians is revenge. So when Marcello got back,
they never forget, Mark. They never forget. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
When Marcello got back in the country, he wanted to kill that SOB Bobby Kennedy, but he knew if he did, the government would come after him with everything they had. So what do? Well, you eliminate JFK, so Bobby will be powerless, and that's exactly what happened. So Dorothy knew about all of this.
Right.
And that's why she ended up, after what Ruby told her, she went to New Orleans. She investigated. She went to Marcello's brother's bar. She started accumulating this information about the fact that the actual assassination scheme, the plan to kill JFK, originated in New Orleans. Marcello with Oswald was there. Ruby was there. There were all these people involved. And so that's what she knew. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately,
was she able to find out if there were any other, government operatives?
There were always question marks about whether the CIA was involved, and they could be still. I'm not going to negate that, but she never investigated that. She never went to Chicago to look into Giancana. She never went to Florida to look into the Cubans. She never did any of that. Ruby was the one. Mm-hmm. And I think she had kind of an affinity for him, because I had an advantage here, Bill. I had practiced law with Melvin Belli.
Yes,
in the mid-1980s in San Francisco, in his office on Montgomery Street. And I got to know him really well. He was a kind of a mafioso imitator. He loved the mafia. He would go to Las Vegas and be hung out with them. You'll like this. One of the first things Belli ever did, he was quite a showman. When he went to a hotel, he would go to the hotel phone and say, "Paging Melvin Belli, paging Melvin Belli."
His way of being announced into the hotel, right, in the casinos.
So I got quite a kick out of him. We became friends. He took me to the Major League Baseball All-Star game in his Rolls Royce. But I discovered very quickly that he had very few morals. Married 6 times, running around all the time, and he loved, though, to brag that he was involved with the mafia. So where I'm getting to with this is that I had an advantage in knowing him, and then I decided to write a biography of Belli in about 2010. And I interviewed a lot of his friends and things like that. And I'm not going to go into that. We don't have time, but that's called Melvin Belli, King of the Courtroom. And I think it's a very good book. It really gives you all the information about Belli and then his representation there of Jack Ruby.
Right.
So I was able to do that. But you're just like me. If you heard what I heard, I know you would do the same thing I did, because one of Belli's close friends, who I remember from the time practicing law there, told me, "Hey, you know Dorothy Kilgallen, don't you?" And I said, "I do not."
Yeah.
He said, "Well, she was the real thing. The New York Post called her the most powerful female voice in America. What's my mouth?" But when she died, Mark, Melvin said to me, "Well, they've killed Dorothy. Now they'll go after Jack Ruby." And I could not get that quote out of my mind. I went ahead and wrote a book called The Poison Patriarch about the 1960 election. But then I started to look into Dorothy, and I was amazed with what I found, because, we're talking about speculation in a lot of these documents and all these so-called experts and everything. But Dorothy was there because she's an eyewitness to history.
Exactly.
And in a letter that I sent, and we'll talk about it in a minute, to the task force, I gave them a copy of all of the columns that she wrote. And then, of course, to top off those columns, she was given by John Sherman Cooper, one of the Warren Commission members, Senator Cooper, a copy of Ruby's testimony before the Warren Commission, before it was supposed to be released. And she published that in the Journal American. And as you can imagine, Hoover, everybody was so upset, they sent about 4 big FBI guys to confront her at home. She never asked for a lawyer, but when they said, "Who's your source?" she said, and this I think is indicative of the kind of woman she was, "I would rather die than reveal my sources." But that put her in the spotlight, in the target area of those people, because then they found out she was writing this tell-all book for Random House, and just a few months into the next year, she was dead.
Yeah, she knew too much. We're talking with Mark Shaw. Mark, we've talked over the years about JFK, his books, Collateral Damage, Denial of Justice, The Poison Patriarch, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, Dorothy Kilgallen, who we're talking about right now. And this is the perfect time for Mark, and we're blessed with this opportune time to have Mark on the show because, Mark, this has been almost, 25 years and a lifetime of investment of investigative reporting, actually more than 15 years, 25 years. What are we up to now? Maybe 35, 40 years now?
Well, I've been working on it a long time, that's
Yeah.
for sure. And Bill, I'll tell you right now, I know somebody listening to this broadcast will get in touch with me.
Right.
Because I hear from people all over the world who have given me tips and so on and so forth. I just had one from something I did yesterday. And I get back to I've got almost 5,000 email addresses. My presentations and interviews on YouTube, there's 15 million views. I'm not bragging about that. I'm just telling you that people are interested in Dorothy Kilgallen. And so many of them now are saying, is her investigation going to be included in the task force investigation? And so far, I'm very dubious of that. Mm-hmm. And to that extent, I wrote this letter to the chairman, Anna Paulina Luna, in Florida. And I said, recently I read of your being appointed the chair and so on and so forth. And I noticed in a press release, you mentioned that based on your initial evaluation of certain evidence, you believe there were two shooters who assassinated JFK, a sure step in the direction of proving there was a plot to kill him. This fits right in with my research, and I hope you will permit me to contribute my research to your investigations and assist where possible. Mm-hmm. I've sent them a couple letters. I've had a couple other people get involved with them. There was a Daily Mail article.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
last Saturday by Rachel Strong about all that and what I believe should happen here. But Dorothy Kilgallen was the real deal, and she was right there. And of course, when she died, as you know, there's speculation she committed suicide, accidental. I've proven it was murder based on 3 barbiturates that were in her system. Because she was a reporter who knew too much. No investigation. Right. In the new book, in Justice for All, I'm going to be able to prove for certain that there was definite mafia control of the medical examiner's office at that particular time by persons in the underworld, which fits right in with the whole Marcello situation.
And how did they get in there without government cooperation, Mark? I mean, how did they get in there, in the medical examiner's office without government help? Even the whole situation of how they hustled JFK's body out of Dallas.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I mean, it just goes on and on. Let me, just as a sidebar here real quick, because I had heard something, and I'm not sure, I can't seem to get validation on it, but that supposedly there was no there was no residue of any kind of a bullet on the body and the hands of Oswald, and also that they could not find any fingerprints on the gun itself. What's the status of that?
I think that those are reliable accounts of what happened. That whole thing was just a mess.
Yes.
I mean, Oswald, Dorothy wrote a column. Why did Oswald shoot Tippit? Because he's trying to get away.
Yes.
And there's no witnesses that said that there was any interaction between it. It didn't make any sense that Oswald would.
I'm glad she asked that question, because that's been my question. What happens is you get the narrative that the government wants you to believe, and they put it out there. And I'm going, I question whether or not Oswald actually shot Tippit, because they're saying there's no gunpowder residue on his hands, because in shooting a weapon, you're going to have gunpowder. I mean, it'll be there for days.
Absolutely.
And he's got nothing.
No. What happens with this is J. Edgar Hoover was the culprit here, and I've got all that information in the books, including the new one about the corruption at the Warren Commission. But why did Hoover want to get this over with quickly? Because, Bill, if it's a nut like Oswald, the FBI can't be responsible for that happening. He wants no investigations of the CIA or the mafia or the Cubans or anything else. So what does he do?
Well, they're going to find out they've been tracking Oswald all these years, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
So what does he do? Well, first of all, you got to get rid of that body. So he goes over to the Parkland Hospital, and basically they steal the body and send it for an autopsy in Washington, D.C. These are military men.
Right.
Dr. Cyril Weck, who know who that is. Yes. He told me he's done 60,000 autopsies. That's the worst one. And this was with the President of the United States.
Yeah.
But as far as Oswald and the gun and how many shots and all this other kind of stuff, it's all very, very confusing. You probably never heard of a man named James Tagg. And I hope you don't mind if we just talk about him a minute.
Yeah.
He was a car salesman in Dallas. He went over to watch the assassination, or excuse me, the
parade.
The parade with JFK. He got there just at the moment when shots rang out, and he felt. He looked down at the curb, and there was a bullet there, and this has been verified. And then he felt his cheek, and he felt blood, and he knew that there obviously it didn't that shot didn't come from the book depository.
Right.
So what to do with it? Well, he was interviewed by the Dallas Morning News. It was on the front page. And James Tagg was talking to people and things like that. So you would think the Warren Commission, they would get him in there right away to talk to him. It was months before they did. And then they had her interviewed by a staffer. But basically, it did prove that there was another shooter of some sort. And I got a kick out of people who say, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But Dorothy, and I think you and I are like this, little things do mean a lot.
Oh, sure they do.
And Tagg's, it's in my new book, Tagg's account is important there. Because it basically, the other thing that I want to mention is in the new book, and people can do this themselves, go to the internet and look at the conversations between LBJ and Hoover when they're picking the Warren Commission.
Right.
They want this guy and they don't want that guy. They don't want Jerry Ford's okay because he can't think and chew gum at the same time.
Right.
We don't want this person.
This is like the January 6th committee all over again, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. And so they also, of all things, they want Alan Dulles on there, who a year earlier had been fired by JFK.
Right,
so
exactly.
It's a very strange group of those people. But, they were basically looking and concluded the Oswald alone conclusion. And I remember when JFK was dead and I heard J. Edgar Hoover say it's Oswald alone, I believed it. Everybody believed all that back then.
Yeah.
People ask me about the relevance of all this about the JFK assassination now. We need to ask questions. They never asked questions back then. We needed to ask questions about the Biden administration. We need to ask questions about this one because it's your own fault if you accept all of this, especially when it's splashed across the internet.
Well,
because that's nuts.
The truth is foundational. That's the problem, and the thing is everybody else is regarded as a conspiratist, but wait a minute. This is all set up by conspirators, right? And so the conspirators are in the shadow, and you and I, because we're still asking questions, like anything. Like I tell our audience, it's like when you know that your kid has stolen cookies out of the cookie jar, crumbs are on his face, and you say, "Come on, Jimmy, be honest with me.
Exactly.
You did get a cookie, right?" No, Mom. I did not get the cookie. I didn't touch the cookie. But it's just one of those things that just gnaws at you because you want your kid to be honest so that they're not carrying that lie with them. Well, it's the same thing in our country. We've been carrying lie upon lie upon lie. And the thing that keeps us from knowing the truth is that in some cases, we don't want to ask questions and we want to ignore the obvious.
Yeah, Dorothy was a common sense person. She wasn't the smartest person in the world. I'm certainly not, but common sense. And she knew. She was a curious woman. She had the best sources in the world, very, very well respected. So people talked to her. And that's how she came up with all of these columns that she wrote. They've killed my president and I'm going to find out what's going on. Right before she died, she said, if the wrong people knew what I know about the assassination would cost me my life. Yeah. I bought a gun. I'm afraid for my family. Somebody's going to kill me. And it wasn't too long after that that I believe, and I think I've proven, that Marcello found out that Dorothy had a romantic interest. That romantic interest had gambling debts, and that they compromised him. And then, because he had worked with Dorothy on her book, he gave Marcello and those people what she was going to put in there. And from that point, as an eyewitness that I found in Las Vegas said to me, when they found out that, she was dead. And as people may know, she was found dead in her townhouse bedroom she never slept in, wearing her makeup, eyelashes, and wearing clothes that she would wear out on a date. Staged death scene, no investigation of any kind at that time. And she basically disappeared from the face of the earth, her name and everything, until, I'm pleased to say, my investigations of her and my books about her brought her back to life. To the point, you'll get a kick out of this. I just noticed that Prime Video has just put up 80 episodes of What's My Line?
Oh, wow.
So people can go watch there and everything. Exactly. But I don't want to miss this. The task force, I've let them know about all of my, Dorothy Kilgallen investigation and all of the documents and everything else. I don't know if they will get back to me or not. I hope they will. But the other thing my hope is here, as I said in my letters to them, is that I hope you will take a look into Dorothy Kilgallen's death.
Right.
And because, there's no question, you read the Daily Mail article.
Yes.
There's no question that there's compelling evidence of the fact that she was murdered. So that's my ulterior motive here. That obviously, that hopefully, they're well intentioned, and I hope that they will do the right thing here with their hearings and so on and so forth. This Rachel Sharp at the Daily Mail and other media, I hope, are watching what's going on there, because you cannot expose the truth or what's close to the truth, the most credible account of what happened to JFK, if you exclude Dorothy Kilgallen's investigation. There's no way you can.
The Democrats have been yelling, for the last 4 years about the threat to democracy. This is a threat to democracy. Democracy dies in the dark, right? And this has been one of those situations of many that have been hidden in the dark. The people have been conditioned to listen to people and, be told what they are to believe, whether it's, 9/11 and how 2 buildings come down as if just by fire from an airplane. And, we find out later on there's military grade demolition stuff there. And that needs to be, somehow that's hidden. And I mean, it's just, this is the problem. As you say, Mark, I agree with you 100%. Democracy and the future of America depends on the truth. If we don't have the truth, and there's other things, there's other loose threads. I mean, there's no question, because, with Dorothy Kilgallen, she's one of over 100 people that suspiciously died. Right?
Yes, that's right.
Right.
Yeah. And let me speak to one other thing that I don't want to miss, and that's Robert Kennedy's death.
Yes.
Nowhere in any of those documents I've seen, and I've gone through them back and forth and everything else, is there anything about his death?
Yes.
The only thing that's in there are a couple little snippets about his time as Attorney General. Well, why is that? Why isn't that in the documents? Are they because of RFK Jr. now being in the administration? I don't know. Did Trump decide to go ahead and not put those things in there? I don't know. But in the meantime, from somebody, just like I hope will happen with your audience, got in touch with me and said, you need to know about a connection between Sirhan and Carlos Marcello. And I leaped off my chair and said, what? I can't give the identity of the person that I was able to go out and interview, but in Southern California, he worked at Santa Anita Racetrack, and he was in charge of the people, the employees that did hot walking, which is taking.
Yes, right, exactly. Taking the horses. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
And he tells the story that Sirhan came there and said, I need work. And this man said, well, I can hire you to do that, but it only pays $200 a month. And Sirhan said he would take it. So Sirhan then works there for, I think, about a year. And they get to know each other and everything else like that.
Right.
And then as he finally leaves Santa Anita Racetrack, and then RFK is killed. And on the front, on the television in Los Angeles is the picture of Sirhan. Do you know this man? So this gentleman, and he's very reliable, called the Hollywood Park racetrack security because he had seen so many people seen Sirhan at Hollywood Park within days of RFK's assassination.
Wow.
In the accompaniment of two men, one on each side of him. He was dressed, Sirhan was, very expensively, and looked like, and he was unemployed, but it looked like these two men, he called them hombres, underworld people, were kind of controlling the actions of Sirhan. So this guy calls security at Hollywood Park and tells them, listen, I know this guy.
Yes.
And the security says, we'll get in touch with the LAPD. Well, what happened? Nobody ever got back to him so that he could tell what he knew because he thought it would make a difference in terms of Sirhan's situation. So this unfolds and connects in a way I think you'll be interested in.
Yes.
Nobody's ever been able to figure out when Sirhan was arrested, he had 4 crisp $100 bills in his pocket. All right. And I've been able to do more investigation, and it baffled the LAPD and the FBI. Where did he get this money? He wouldn't tell them. He was all confused and so on and so forth, and made statements he shouldn't have made and so on and so forth. They've never been able to figure out where that came from. Well, that connects back with him being with these two guys at Hollywood Park.
Right.
But one thing that this guy did tell me, we were never interviewed, my wife and me, but for the next year, we could tell our phone was tapped because we would hear the click all the time. Click, click, and he felt like he was being spied upon. But there's nothing in those documents about RFK. Now, the task force is charged with looking into Robert Kennedy's death. Yes. And I've given them that information now, so hopefully they can follow up on this.
Exactly. A little sidebar here. I interviewed Rosie Greer. Rosie Greer was RFK's bodyguard.
Ooh, big guy.
Oh, yeah, really. And one day I'll tell you a story about he and I, how we collided at home plate at a celebrity softball game.
And you
Big Rosie,
lived to see the next day?
I'm 5'7". Rosie's like 6'5", 6'6", he is a mess of humanity. But anyway, we had fun remembering that and talking about it. But anyway, people think that Rayford Johnson was the one that had the gun. It was Rosie. Rosie got the gun and he put it in his pocket, and Rayford, thought, hey, this is going to be something. So he got the gun from Rosie and acted, so that he could continue on with the narrative that he was the one that got the gun. But it was Rosie. It was Rosie who took the gun away from Sirhan.
Did Mr. Greer, did he tell you about the problem that people have had with this over the years where, Sirhan is in front of Bobby Kennedy.
Yes.
And Bobby Kennedy is shot like this. Did he talk about that at all?
No, we didn't get into much because I got to tell you, when we just barely talked about it, Rosie is still moved by it. I mean, he loved Bobby Kennedy, and you could tell he was heartbroken. It was like one of those moments, sometimes you just feel like it's just a tender moment, and you got to just let whatever comes come. And I just wanted just to listen to him, and I felt for the pain that he had.
But you did so.
Anyway, we got a couple of minutes left here. Real quick, just on a couple of things. I know we talked about potential involvement, FBI, CIA, Vietnam is an issue, LBJ. LBJ's on the plane with JFK's body underneath, and he signs the authorization to get us engaged in Vietnam. This is all kind of suspicious stuff, Mark, don't you think?
Well, it really is. And again, people just have to ask questions and put on their thinking cap. Don't be swayed by, all of this material coming out even today. Mm-hmm. You've got to ask questions about this so that you know exactly what's going on. But that's, LBJ is another character in all of this. I have I said, go to the internet and look at the interchange between LBJ and Hoover. And they're talking about this, and Hoover, I don't have it right in front of me, but basically the conversation is LBJ says, well, it doesn't matter how many shots were fired or anything like that. It matters where they came from. And I don't believe that there was one bullet. And Hoover says, well, I agree. See, we never knew any of that. And that was never in the Warren Commission report. There was never the dissent that Senator Cooper and and Senator Russell wanted about the silver bullet theory, and they couldn't believe that there was just one shooter. That was all covered up by Hoover, I think Earl Warren probably, and certainly LBJ, because LBJ never wanted an investigation of him, that's for sure.
Right,
because
exactly.
of a lot of things in his background with Billy Sol Estes, remember that?
Right,
all these
exactly.
things.
Yes.
In fact, I found a KBG document where they were going to investigate LBJ because of obviously his motive and benefit from the crime.
Yes.
He became president. So
Right.
That was interesting.
Well, he became president and avoided an investigation, further investigation, like you mentioned, Billy Sol Hostis, and what was being exposed there, right?
Oh boy, he was a bad guy. There is a great photograph I have in my book, Fighting for Justice, and in the new one. It's at the LBJ Ranch, and here's tall LBJ in his cowboy boots, and down here is Alan Dulles, little bitty Alan Dulles.
Yeah. Oh,
looking up at LBJ like, my God.
Yeah.
It's just terrible.
Well,
Anyway.
exactly. Well, Mark, we got to leave it there. I cannot thank you enough. I appreciate the time to come on and tell us all about it. Now, the new book coming out soon, right?
It'll be in the fall. Injustice for All. People can get in touch with me. MarkShawBooks.com, mshaw@yahoo.com. You send me an email and I will get back to you. I promise that if people get in touch.
Mark, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. You're a good man. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
You got it. Bye.